So I'll briefly introduce our next speaker, who is an Orthodox theologian, Marius Dorobantu, who is currently a research associate at the Faculty of Religion and Theology at VU University in Amsterdam, and has finished his PhD in ethics at the University of Strasbourg in 2018, was it, I think? 2019, well, exactly on the issue of Imago Dei, patterns in theology in relation towards artificial intelligence. So when I briefly browsed the discussion, which has already started in the chat room, then I think you're addressing exactly the theme that is behind our discussion today. So what is the exact human dimension with all the confrontations and Turing tests and chatbots behind or in relation towards artificial intelligence and all the phenomena that appear in our everyday life today. So Marius, I'm curious about your lecture. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Alphonse. It was actually just last year that I got my PhD.
I see.
But before that, I was a student at Radboud, so I am very happy to be back, even virtually, as an alumnus and have this joint lecture. So I think there are many theological ways of looking at AI, but today I will mainly speak. I will choose two of these: one more enthusiastic, and the other one more critical. So I have good news and bad news for you. Which one should I start with? No, I'm just kidding. It's only bad. It's only good news. It's the Annunciation today. So this is I think this happily overlaps with the content of what I'm talking about. So firstly, I think we can. I think AI can help us better understand ourselves and our place in the world and what makes us distinctive and in the image of God. And secondly, I think theology can bring some depth to discussions about the importance of selfhood, of conscious and authentic relationality, especially in debates around robot personhood. So firstly, I believe we should embrace the developments in AI and what they ultimately tell us about the nature of intelligence. In a way, AI helps us to better understand what we are not. As someone very aptly put it, AI is the whole and not the donut. So AI just shows us what is actually missing from the picture. And in theological anthropology, we could really use such new information because by understanding what we are not, we also get a picture, a better picture of what we are. Our entire Christian anthropology is built around the notion that we are created in the image of God. That is in the first chapter in Genesis. But to be honest, nobody really knows what that is supposed to mean exactly. So we know that in some way we are like God and unlike any other creature on our planet, but that's the most anyone can confidently say. And now there are two ways to go about it. One is to look at what it is that makes us like God, so a sort of vertical perspective. And the other one is to look at what differentiates us from the animals, which is the more horizontal perspective. The vertical perspective is what we like to think we are doing in theology. So we look at God and we try to see in which respect we are like God. If God is good, then perhaps being good is what makes us in God's image. Or if God is a person, then our personhood is what makes us God's image. But I think this can also go the other way around. And we can ask ourselves, how much do we really know about God? And how much are we actually projecting upon God by looking at ourselves? Many thinkers are allergic to the monotheistic picture of God, precisely because this God seems to be too anthropomorphic. In other words, he is too much in our own image. Are we intelligent beings because we are images of an intelligent creator? Or are we projecting our intelligence upon God? And we imagine this intelligent, all-knowing God because that's what we value in ourselves? This is a very hard theological question. The horizontal perspective is to compare ourselves with other creatures and see what makes us special. But this is also tricky because on the one hand, almost all the intellectual capacities we thought are uniquely human have actually been found in at least some other animals. Furthermore, evolutionary science tells us that we haven't been teleported here by God to a ready-made created world, but that we are actually part of this world and we are part of a continuum of life forms. We share common ancestors with the animals around us. So in a certain way, we are not really that special. On the other hand, if we look at what we can do and how our world looks like, the difference from the animals is colossal. So there are so many capacities that we took to a wholly different level. I'm talking here about language, tool use and technology, mental representation, planning, problem solving, and so on, that it is impossible to pick only one that makes us distinctive and in the image of God. So in a way, the animals aren't too much help in our attempt to define what the image of God is. Here is where I think AI can be of a crucial role, because regardless of which precise capacity we choose as our differentiator from the animals, I think all these capacities have to do to a certain extent with intelligence. So the Aristotelian idea that humans are rational animals, that intelligence is what really distinguishes us from the animals, is still very much at work today. What AI does is it promises to shatter this paradigm because computer programs are already better than us at things we used to consider the apex of our intelligence. Elephants and chimpanzees don't play chess, but AI does, as Pim very aptly summarized it, and it does so at a superhuman level. If humans are in any way special, it turns out it's not because our mathematical or logical abilities, which were the first ones to be successfully emulated on machines. Nowadays, machines are still not at human level, really, and we still take comfort in things like creativity, intuition, common sense, or the ability to learn very fast. But who is to say that AI will not master these in the following decades or centuries? Time is on its side, in fact. So the prospect of human-level AI is a fascinating thought experiment because it forces us to get out of the comfort zone of our current indisputable superiority and really question our paradigms. If robots will be capable of doing everything that humans can do, if they become indistinguishable from us on the outside, so to say, as in sci-fi, would there still be anything special about humans? If you can tell, does it matter? As the female robot from Westworld perfectly summarizes this crucial philosophical and theological problem. Well, in my opinion, what AI clearly shows is that what makes us human is not our rationality. We spend centuries thinking that rationality is what distinguishes us from the animals, and we take a lot of pride in our problem-solving abilities and abstract thinking. Furthermore, we built our entire Western civilization around this pedestal of intelligence. The infamous IQ score measures precisely this kind of left hemisphere type of intelligence. To a certain extent, I think that is good, and we benefit a lot from it, both individually and collectively. However, when we think of AI, which is the epitome of rationality, something suddenly seems a bit off. Somehow, such a hyper-rational creature, which always calculates in a very cold manner all the possible outcomes and statistically chooses the optimal every time, doesn't seem at all human-like. So we look at what artificial superintelligence promises to be, and we see something terrifyingly alien, something that we would never want to become ourselves, even if intelligence is what we seem to be valuing in ourselves. And this, I think, is an interesting paradox, because on the one hand, we have all these cognitive biases that plague our thinking. But on the other hand, they are also what ultimately makes us human. In Christian thinking, we've known that all along. The image of our God projected in the person of Jesus Christ is not one of super intelligence. Christ is super love, super humility, super empathy, super vulnerability, if anyone insists of using the super qualification. But Christ is not necessarily super intelligence, or that's not the first thing you think about when thinking about Christ. So what AI is clearly demonstrating is that intelligence, understood as computation and problem solving, is not the mark of humanity. Animals also solve problems, although of a more practical nature, and biological evolution can be seen as a colossal process of problem solving, that is, solving the problems that the environment keeps throwing at organisms or at populations. AI can also solve problems, very differently from how we do it, but in many cases much more accurately. What I'm trying to argue, I guess, is that computation and problem solving are to a certain extent ubiquitous in our universe. What makes humans unique is not their ability to solve problems and to tame Mother Nature, but rather what makes us special is the bizarre side effects of our type of thinking, such as the fact that we are very reflexive, which apparently is no evolutionary advantage. Just thinking about the nature of things doesn't get you too far when a lion is chasing you in the savannah. Or we have this thirst for fulfillment outside ourselves, in others, and in God. These are very strange characteristics. And I think they account more for our distinctiveness than intelligence and rationality. What differentiates us from even the most intelligent conceivable computers is something very difficult to rigorously capture in words. But it has to do with some of our strangest characteristics, which evolutionary science sometimes regards as a side effect, because they seem to escape the neat laws of evolution by natural selection. I'm talking here about the deeply relational nature of human beings. It is true that relationality and cooperation make sense from an evolutionary perspective, and many species develop in this direction. Some, like insects, for instance, take it to a wholly new level as compared to humans. But I think human relationships have this extra dimension, an authenticity that is difficult to pin into words, but of which most of us are somehow intuitively aware. There is something more than hormones, chemistry, and neuron firing in human love and self-sacrifice. And many people would agree to that, but what is it that makes it special? Or, yeah, this is the million-dollar question. So to come back to the question at the core of this lecture, what is it that makes humans authentic others and AI inauthentic others? I think in Orthodox theology, a very beautiful and coherent response is formulated by John Zizioulas. He proposes a relational ontology applicable to both humans and God. And let me explain that a little bit. In classical philosophy, substance is the most fundamental level of existence. Relation only is the second level. You have substance and then you have relation between substances. However, in modern philosophy, after the so-called relational turn, at least from Kant and Hegel onwards, this order has been reversed. So instead of having the individual first and then relationship between individuals, the prevailing view now is that relationship comes first and is constitutive to the individual, although it sounds a bit paradoxical. And this is exactly what characterizes Zizioulas's relational ontology. For Zizioulas, a person can never be defined independently through itself, but only as part of its relationships, in a web of relationships with other selves. And he goes as far as saying that God, the Holy Trinity, is fundamentally relational. The divine substance, what the Greeks called the ousia of God, is the communion between the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. When it comes to humanity, it can be said that our existence, our being at the most fundamental level, resides in the relationship we have with God. We only exist because God calls us into existence. That is what gives content and meaning to our existence. Our whole lives are, theologically speaking, a struggle towards true ontology. And we can only grow and become more real or more authentic through the exercise of relationship with God and with each other. This longing for true being is the deepest sense of the world, in the deepest sense of the word, is what Zizioulas sees as the image of God in us. But the only reason why it is possible for us to become such selves, such hypostasis, is because we have access to the ultimate source of ontology, which is the Trinitarian relationship between the Father and the Son. And this access is granted to us through the hypostatic union between the two natures, divine and human, in the person of Jesus Christ. And now, this, of course, is a very theological paradigm. And there are many people who are not as strongly committed to a belief in a Holy Trinity or in the divinity of Jesus Christ. But without going too deep into this, let's just point out that non-theist philosophy has a lot of difficulties to account for the miracle of selfhood, of consciousness. In philosophy, this is sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness. So how is it possible that consciousness, a sense of being and of meaning, can arise from inert matter, from the interaction between atoms? I'm not saying that the response is Zizioulas's relational ontology necessarily. I'm just saying that there is a very beautiful account of that in Eastern theology. Now, if we come back to the AI problem, could AI also become a self and thus an authentic other in this case? Well, I think that what Eastern theology seems to indicate is no, it couldn't, or at least not by human effort alone. Unless AI does not get invited into the same kind of relationship with God, so AI cannot drink from the same spring of being, it will always remain a mindless simulation. But what I try to show is that theologically, we have no reason to fear AI, but quite the contrary. As a science, I think AI is a very blessed effort that can help us to better understand ourselves, the world, and to a certain extent, even God. And I will close it with a quote from a famous English theologian who, at the turn of the 20th century, I think, said that for Christianity, Darwinism came in the guise of an enemy, but has done the work of a friend. And I believe the same can be said of artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Well,